There's a question that pretty much everyone has to deal with at some point. When life just feels completely unfair, where do you find the strength not just to get through it, but to actually find joy? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive into some really profound answers, drawn from a fascinating text. Okay, so let's start with a question for you, just to get you thinking. Picture the last time you were treated unjustly. Maybe something happened at work, or with your family, or just out in the world. What was your gut reaction? Was it anger? Did you want to get even? Or did you just feel hopeless? It's something we can all relate to, for sure. Now, our source material takes this very modern feeling and grounds it in a powerful historical example, the Apostle Paul. I mean, this guy wasn't just treated unfairly once or twice. He was thrown in prison over and over again. And according to the text, it was always unjust. His life really becomes a case study for looking at a totally different way to respond. So if our usual reactions, getting angry or falling into despair, if those aren't the answer, then what is? Our source lays out a radically different path. It calls it a steadfast response. Let's break down what that actually looks like. All right, now the first piece of advice from our source, it really cuts against our natural instincts. It says that when you're facing opposition, when you're up against prejudice, do not become emotional. That is a tough pill to swallow, right? It suggests that our immediate gut reactions might actually be getting in our way. So instead of that knee-jerk emotional reaction, the text gives us this 4-step path. First, stand firm. This is all about grounding yourself in what you believe in so you're not easily shaken. Second, do not retaliate. That's a conscious choice to break that cycle of negativity. Third, maintain your integrity. This is huge. It's about focusing on your own character, which you can control, instead of someone else's actions, which you can't. And finally, turn your face to heaven, basically shifting your whole perspective beyond the here and now. And this table just lays out the contrast perfectly. On the left, you've got the common reactions: lashing out emotionally, wanting revenge, maybe compromising your own values, or just giving up in despair. But the text proposes this radical alternative for each one: steadfastness instead of raw emotion, meekness instead of revenge, integrity instead of compromise, and humility instead of despair. It's a complete reframing of what strength really is. Now, I know what you're thinking. That all sounds good on a slide, but in real life, that's incredibly hard to do. And you know what? The source material is very, very clear about this. It fully acknowledges that choosing this response involves a major struggle, one that's happening behind the scenes. Yeah, the text doesn't sugarcoat it at all. It actually calls it a long and earnest struggle, which tells you that this difficulty is just an expected part of the journey. It frames it as this internal fight against what it calls the powers of darkness, which is really just all those negative forces, both inside us and outside, that try to stop our progress. So if this feels like a tough fight, the source is basically saying, yeah, that's because it is. You're not alone in feeling that way. So if it's this hard, how is anyone supposed to actually do it? Well, this is the real turning point in this whole explainer. The strength to have this kind of response doesn't just come from sheer willpower. It comes from what the text calls the promise of a presence. And this right here is the anchor. The source points to this core promise from this central figure in the text, the Redeemer. I will never leave you nor forsake you. I am with you always. The idea here is that you are not facing all this unfairness by yourself. The strength to be steadfast, to be meek, to have integrity, it comes from believing in this constant, unwavering support. And it's this promise of a constant presence that allows for what might be the most profound and challenging idea in our source material, the paradox of joy. This idea was captured so powerfully by an early church leader named Tertullian. He wrote that persecution didn't stamp out the church, it actually made it grow. This quote illustrates a really shocking paradox, that from this viewpoint, suffering and injustice can become a catalyst for growth and resilience. It's not just an ending. But then the text pushes this paradox to its absolute limit. It gives this instruction to rejoice always. And we just have to pause there and ask, how? How is that even remotely possible when you're dealing with real, gut-wrenching pain and unfairness? And this part is so crucial. The source doesn't ignore the reality of that pain. It validates it. It lists these profound hardships. We're not talking about minor inconveniences here. These are the deepest sorrows we experience as humans. The text is not asking you to pretend these things aren't happening. So, the crucial point the source leaves us with is this final, provocative question that reframes everything. It suggests,
The key isn't that we have to force ourselves to rejoice in our suffering. No. Instead, the challenge is to ask, in what can we find a source of joy that exists alongside and in spite of our situation? It's about searching for a constant in the middle of all of life's variables. And that is a powerful question to carry with you.